Greek is a language in which we have lots of ways to look up different words that we might be interested in. And in this video, I'm going to look at a bunch of different lexicons, dictionaries if you like, and how to use them well and when to use them really. First of all, what is a lexicon? Well, a lexicon is really just a dictionary. Typically, a lexicon is a word used to refer to a foreign language dictionary, particularly Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic seems to be. So we're just talking about Greek dictionaries essentially in this video, and we're going to look at them through a bunch of different categories, because deciding on which one you want to get is going to depend on what you're trying to achieve. There are really 4 categories that I'm going to look through in this video. The first one is if you're just looking to simply look a word up, and all you want is a basic definition. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And not all of these technically are lexicons, okay? So the first 2 categories are definitely lexicons, but then we have these other works that are often thrown into the same bucket, but technically they are different ways of finding words in the New Testament. So they kind of fall into that same bucket. Now, as we do this, we're going to be looking at one word, because using this one word to look at all the different dictionaries is going to help you to see the different ways they all approach the same word. Now, not all of these I'm going to be able to show you exactly, you'll see why. But this is just a helpful way of just seeing the differences between them. And the word we're going to use is dokimazo. Dokimazo is a Greek verb that means to prove, to test, to examine, depending on the context. It occurs 22 times in the Greek New Testament, so not super common, because if it was super common, then that would just be too easy. And if it was super rare, there wouldn't be enough instances for us to actually make any meaningful comparison of things like meaning. So we're going to look at the word dokimazo, and it's a word that I kind of enjoy anyway. And I'm going to leave links to all the works that I'm going to talk about in this video in the description below. If you want to get a copy of them, you can click down there and click through to find them either on Logos or on Amazon. And if you do that, then that helps this channel at no extra cost to you. So thank you for your support. So let's talk about those first dictionaries, lexicons if you like, that are just going to give you a very simple meaning. Now, these range in price. Some of these, in fact, 2 of the 3 I'm about to give you are actually in the public domain, which means you can go grab them for absolutely nothing. But the first one is not. And this is a concise Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament. Now, this work was published in 2009 by Frederick Duncker. Now, Duncker is one of the editors of BDAG, which we are going to talk about a little bit later on, and we'll get to that. But this is a very modern and very up-to-date concise dictionary, and I think this is really worth considering strongly. So if we were to click over and have a look at the word dokimazo here, you can see what we have here is we have a very brief definition at the beginning here, and then we have a series of different meanings for us. So you can see we have A, we have B, and so on. And in each of these, what he's going to give you here is a list of the different uses in the New Testament, particularly of that word and how it's being used there. You see here, down here, there's some other usages as well. So what he's giving you here is a very brief definition. The other thing that you find here is he's not really indicating to you whether he's looked at every instance of this word in the Greek New Testament. Now, this normally isn't necessarily a big deal, but when you get to words that don't occur very often, like dokimazo, it's often very handy to know, is every instance of this word here in this definition? Has he looked at every single word? And here he has. He's actually included them all, but he's not told you that. If you go to look at another word like agapao, which occurs frequently in the New Testament, he's got hardly any verses for it. So he's not looking at them all there. Here he is, but he's not telling you that. So that's one of those things that's often quite handy to know, but I wouldn't take that as a big drawback here. Again, all that means is you're going to have to go and do a search of your own, which is pretty straightforward in Logos Bible software, where you're going to find that there are 22 occurrences and you're going to be able to look through them all there anyway. So I recommend that you don't stress too much about this, but it's just one of those things that's nice to have that you are going to find some of these other ones are actually going to have. But this is a great dictionary. It's very simple, very easy, but again, he gives you, for every single instance here, because he's going through every instance, he's giving you a slightly different gloss, if you like. That's the word you could use in English to replace this Greek word. Now, this also helps you to sort of get a bit of an idea of the lexical range of the word and the different meanings that you can come to in the text. So this is really quite helpful. Let's look at another one. This next one was published in 1888. It is Liddell and Scott. This is in the public domain. You can go grab a copy of this from pretty much anywhere online for free without any copyright infringement. And again, you can see here, this is very simple. We have a basic definition. We have just right here. Then we have our broken down into different types of definitions we have, and I'm not quite sure of the reasoning for the numbers here, because there's a 3, then there's a 2, then there's a 4, but there's no number 1. I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, the point here is that you can see that we've got a bunch of different definitions of this word which we can have a look at. Now, one of the things you might notice here is he's actually not listing any New Testament texts. Now, I believe there are places where he does, but here he's focused really on classical Greek. And this is one of the things to watch out for. What scope of Greek are you really interested in considering? Are you looking at the word as it's used in Plato and Thucydides, for instance, or are you interested in how it's being used in the New Testament? Because those are quite different in many cases. So you want to be wise with this. Liddell and Scott is often recommended by Greek professors and whatnot, but I'm not sure for this reason, because it does really not focusing so much on the New Testament. I'm not sure this is the best work to use for the New Testament, though it is free. And if you want a free work, well, this is a good one. Another one that is worth looking at, though, that is free, is Abbott-Smith's one. And here's Abbott-Smith. And again, you can see it's pretty short. Again, he gives you a little bit broader understanding of what this word means. Here he's taking you through the Septuagint usage of the word. So he's looking at the Old Testament translation of the Hebrew into Greek, which is the Septuagint, and he's also looking at the New Testament uses of it as well. He's going to give you a bunch of different instances of this word and talk about how they're being used in those different places. But again, very, very basic, not a lot of definitions. And you do have this little cross down here. See that little cross you've got right there at the very end of this sentence here? That little cross is telling you he's looking at every instance of this word in the New Testament. So that's very, very helpful. And you can see underneath that, he's then got a synonym for this. And so he includes synonyms, not antonyms necessarily, but synonyms, words that have similar meaning, but are different words. So again, here's, this is kind of helpful in that sense as well. Now, if you want my recommendation of which one of these to get, I would honestly go with the Concise Greek-English Dictionary of the New Testament. It is the most up to date. It has the latest scholarship in it, and it's been done very, very well. I recommend the Concise English Lexicon of the New Testament for just a very simple definition of a Greek word. But what about if you want to go much deeper into a word? What about if you want to do a word study? Well, let me give you 3 different options here. And again, these are going to differ a little bit depending on your level of Greek. 2 of these actually include Strong's numbers. And so if you don't know Greek, but you do want to do some basic word studies, one of these might be kind of helpful for that reason. I've got my concerns about that, and I've got a video I've already talked about with word studies, which you can find up here. Go check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, let's get into the 3 that I recommend. And again, I'm not giving you every Greek dictionary that's out there. There are hundreds of them. I'm just giving you perhaps the top ones that I think are worth considering in the different categories. And the first one we're going to take a look at here is by Zodiates, which is the Word Study Dictionary of the New Testament, a Word Study New Testament Dictionary, I think is what he calls it. Now you can see here, we've got much more writing here to explain the text. There's a much bigger explanation of what's going on. Again, he's got pretty much every different usage covered here. He's got all the different ones listed. He's not telling you that he's got every one listed, but they are there. And in this case, you've got the metaphorical use that it's being used of. You've got a basic use in terms of how it's basically used. You've also got transliterated Greek. So if you don't actually read Greek, you can learn from this. Dokimazo is transliterated into English, so you can at least pronounce it out loud in English. So here we go. He gives you a basic definition and a little, even sometimes a little bit of history of the word built into that. Now, it's not an etymological background. It's not giving you that full background. This is really very brief still, but it's helpful if you're an English reader and you just want that little bit of help. Now, again, we've got a couple of different usages here. The first one, of course, goes through a number of different forms of it and so on. You know, and he's got a few theological notes as he goes along as well. And the other one he's got here is the sense of having proved. And so he's got another definition here as well, along with a number of verses that fit that definition too. He also gives you, what you might notice here at the beginning, he gives you a future form of it, dokimaso, so how the word changes into the future form. But again, it's transliterated, so I'm not 100% sure how useful this is, but you might find it but he gives you a couple of different forms of the root here as well. And then at the end here, he gives you a derivative for that word. So he's telling you another word that is made up from this word, as well as synonyms and antonyms as well. So he's giving you a pretty decent sort of understanding of the breadth of the word, words that are used in conjunction or instead of it, and so on and so forth. So if you're an English reader, this is a really good option to choose. It's still quite brief. but it's enough to sort of give you, wet your feet if you like, into the world of word studies. I used to use this quite a lot before I learnt Greek, and I found that while it's really good, there are times where he doesn't cover every instance of a particular word. You don't always know that, of course, and then you're left to say, well, what about this instance? Does it go under this usage or that usage? And you've got to be really careful with that for a bunch of reasons. We'll come back to that toward the end. Let me talk about the next one here, and this is BDAG. BDAG is really the gold standard of the lexical world in terms of biblical Greek. This stands, BDAG itself is an acronym that stands for the author's surnames, but the full title of this is a Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature, and you can see why they shorten it to BDAG. This was originally published in 2000, however this is the third edition, which means it leans on much earlier works from these 4 authors, now 4, which was then updated by Frederick Duncker, the guy who wrote the Concise dictionary, and then published in 2000 with this massive update, and it's very, very good. If you can only get one of all the books that I'm giving you here today, this is the one you want to get. And you probably want to get it on Logos if you can afford to get it there. It's often good to get it there in a bundle. I'll leave a couple of links down below so you can find that there as well. So let's have a look at Dokimazo in BDAG. You can see here it's a little bit more robust. Again, you've got a basic kind of entry here. You've got some different forms. So here he's giving you Dokimazo, Dokimo. So he's giving you different forms that you're going to find of it, the aorist form, the perfect form of it, and so on and so forth. So you get a lot more use cases and a lot more exposure to the way the word is formed and appears in the Greek New Testament and beyond that as well. And that's one of the things about this is that while Zodiates, he does actually give you Greek and Greek usage from the Hebrew Septuagint, or the translation of the Hebrew Septuagint into English, as well as New Testament. This actually covers the Septuagint, also covers ancient Greek literature, and it also covers the Apostolic Fathers as well, which is super helpful because then he gives you links to this and say the Shepherd Humas or wherever it happens to be. So again, very comprehensive. This is one of the reasons this is so good, because it's really the one dictionary or lexicon you need for all your reading in Koine Greek. It's super helpful and it's going to give you good solid answers. Now, as we go through these, of course, we see the usage of this in the Septuagint is pretty consistent. He gives you that basic use here to start with, which is the way it's often found in the Septuagint, he's saying. You can also see here that, different usages of where it's found, including, if you mouse over these, some of these are going back to manuscripts and how manuscripts might be listing these words as well, but you're going outside of that as well into things like Plato and so on. So very, very helpful, very robust. And it may not, again, he doesn't always include every usage of a word, and nor do they actually tell you whether they include every usage, but they do other things here too. Like, for instance, he's referencing these German works here. Again, that goes back to the pedigree of this, the earlier editions, which were originally written in German, then translated into English, and now it's been completely updated for this third edition, completely from English from start to finish. So again, and you've got references to other works here as well, like the even exegetical dictionary of the New Testament, Spick and the work that he did, and so on and so forth. So this is a very comprehensive work, very well, well worth having if you are interested in a single dictionary that's going to do everything. Now, there are a few times where you're going to find some of the references here are a little cryptic, and this is one of the reasons I recommend getting this in Logos Bible software, because if you don't know what, say, pla leg means, you can just mouse over it and it's going to actually give you if you've got the resource, it's going to give you a link to that resource itself, and you can just go jump in there. This is obviously in the English, mouse over it, there you got Plato, Lysias, you can see exactly who's using what where, and this is all linked and very easy to use. The other thing about the Logos version is that it also has this outline formatting enabled, which does break it out a little bit and just makes it a little bit easier to read. Honestly, I don't normally use that because I just don't find it helpful, but nonetheless, it's there if you want it, and a lot of people do really like that feature. So that's BDAG, and I really recommend this one. And again, if you can only afford one, this is the one to get. Which brings us to the big one, should we say. Now, again, I'm not telling you all of the dictionaries that are around. At this point, if you wanted a really comprehensive exegetical dictionary that had every meaning of the word, you would hear someone recommend to you the 14-volume TDNT, Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. Unfortunately, this work is quite dated now, and it's got a number of issues with many of the entries in it, and so I really just don't recommend it. It's still good as a backup, but I just don't really recommend it. Instead, what I do tend to recommend now is the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis. Now, this was originally published in the 70s by Colin Brown in a single volume. It's now been updated and expanded on by Moisés Silva and was published in 2014, I think it was 2014, thereabouts, in 5 volumes. This now is a really good midway between TDNT, with its 14 volumes of craziness and its etymological nuttiness, to a really solid lexical work now that is well worth having on your shelf, or better yet, inside your Logos library. So let's have a look at this one, looking at the word dokimazo again, and you can see the first thing you see is you've got this block of text right here. What you've got here is you've got the main word followed by the Strong's word, and then you've got a bunch of different words based on the same root, all of which he's covering in this one article, which is really helpful, because one of the things you tend to find is if you are looking at a word, its meaning doesn't necessarily change a lot from the root in the different forms, and yet this is a way of consolidating all of that down. So you're looking really with each entry at how the word group is being used broadly. Now, he will still break it out into individual words where necessary, but this is really, I think, kind of helpful in many ways. It certainly brings a lot together under one roof, so to speak. Now, when we get this, we've got our basic concepts following on from that, and then underneath that we have GL, we have JL, and then underneath that we have NT. What does all of that stand for? Well, this is the beauty of this work. We have this broken then into 3 chronological sections, if you want. GL stands for Greek literature. Now, what he's doing here is he's going to look at the use of this word in Greek literature prior to the New Testament's writing. So he's going to look at Thucydides and Plato and all those kinds of works, just like we saw with some of the other ones. However, he's going to look at how they use the word specifically without confusing it with theological usage, which is really helpful for giving us the background of a word before it was used for the New Testament. Now, many New Testament words don't change, but there are a few here and there that get redefined, if you like, or filled with new meaning in the New Testament or even the Septuagint era. So this is really helpful. JL then is Jewish literature, and then NT obviously is the literature of the New Testament, including the Apostolic Fathers. So again, this gives you a nice, robust understanding of how this looks. And in the Jewish literature section, this is one of the things I really like about this, is that he's actually going to go through and talk about how this was translated. So what was the Hebrew word from which this word was translated into Greek? So if this word is found in the Septuagint, what's the Hebrew word underlying it in the Hebrew text? That then allows you to say, okay, so this is how the Jews were thinking this word should be used, or at least the Greek-speaking Jews who did that translation. So again, you're getting some really helpful information about the use of this word and the understanding of this word during, by Jews as people who share essentially in the same faith heritage as Christians before it comes to the New Testament. So again, some of these usages then inform the way the word is going to be used in the New Testament era. So this is a really helpful addition and gives you a good, helpful overview of the diachronic, that is through time, use of a word and insights into how the word developed as time went on. It's very comprehensive, probably the most comprehensive of all of these, and is well worth having a look at. Now again, he doesn't make any of the etymological errors I think that TDNT tends to make, so this is a far better investment of your money than TDNT. We're getting down to the last 2 now. Let's talk about if you're reading the Greek New Testament, and really I just have one here if you're interested in it, and that is this one by Burer and Miller. This is a new reader's lexicon of the Greek New Testament. If you're reading through the New Testament and you don't have a reader's edition at the bottom, and I recommend you don't, then this book is probably one of those ones you want. It lists every word that occurs 50 times or less in the New Testament in a canonical order. So basically, I'm reading, for instance, through Luke chapter 12, and I come across the word dokimazo in Luke chapter 12, and what I can do there is I can look this word up. I can go to Luke 12 verse 56, and look at that, Luke 12 verse 56, and here is that Greek word, and they give me just a simple basic definition of it. They also give you all these numbers here, telling you, first of all, how many times it occurs in this book, in this author, and in total in the New Testament. And then at the end here, he's going to give you the other ones, the other occurrences, or at least one other occurrence of this book, in this case, in the book of Luke. Now, in this case, we've got a discrepancy here. This is normally the number of times the word occurs in the Greek in the book of Luke, but there's only 2. So I suspect that there's a variant somewhere or something like that, and this is a variation somewhere, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the first number there is going to be the number of times the word occurs in this book, and then you're going to have the other occurrences at the end of the line. So that's worth having as well. The only issue with this, really, to be aware of, is that here we are in Luke 12:56 looking at dokimazo. All good, right? But look at the definition we get here. Put to the test or examine. Well, what about if we're reading in Luke chapter 2? Verse 18, here's dokimazo here. Again, it occurs 4 times in the book of Romans, 17 times in Paul's writings in general, 22 times in the New Testament, but here he gives you a completely different gloss. Why is that? Well, what they're doing here is they're giving you contextualized glosses. Now, if you're going to learn to memorize a word, this is not very helpful. This is also the way Logos Bible Software gives you glosses inside of, at the bottom of the screen if you want, when you mouse over a Greek word. Again, they're contextualized. This is not very helpful for memorizing a word. It just says what translations will normally use this word, how this translation will normally translate this word into English in that location. So be aware of that. It's not very good for learning words, but otherwise great for just looking up a simple gloss on the fly while you're reading. So the last category then is if you're actually learning to read every word in the Greek New Testament. In this case, you want, again, a simple gloss, but you want to have it set up for you in such a way that is going to be accessible and useful. Now, there are 2 books here that I'm going to recommend. Then I'm going to give you an actual recommendation instead of either of those. And that is, first of all, you've got Warren Trenchard's classic Complete Vocabulary Guide to the Greek New Testament. This has 3 sections in it. It's not available on Logos, unfortunately. This is a 3rd edition of it, a revised edition of it. Anyway, this is not available on Logos, but it is kind of helpful. It lists them in 3 sections. The first section is going to list the words by cognate. That means it's going to take the words by their root meaning, and then it's going to list a bunch of other words and derivatives and synonyms according to that root as well. So that's the first section. The second section is just going to list every word in the Greek New Testament by occurrence down to those hapax legomena. So you've got all of those listed from the most common to the least common. And then finally, you're going to have a section at the back that's going to have a list of all the principal parts for all the verbs, all of which is very helpful. And certainly when I started learning words by vocabulary, this was where I went to. But that got really, really hard, because once you get down to about 10 occurrences, you're just memorizing lists of words, and it's really not much fun. So great for a base kind of starting point, but not something I'd recommend if you're really serious about learning the vocabulary of the New Testament in any meaningful way. Which brings us to this one, which is a much more recent book, released just 2 or 3 years ago, Fresch, Christopher Fresch, who's a New Testament scholar, a book-by-book approach, or a book-by-book guide to New Testament Greek vocabulary. Now, this also lists all the words in each book by its frequency. So again, book by book, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, so on and so forth, book by book. And then it's going to give you all the words in that book listed by the number of times it occurs in that book. Okay, now the important thing to note here is dokimazo occurs 22 times in the New Testament. But if you go to the Gospel of Luke, you have to look under 3 times, because it only occurs 3 times in the Gospel of Luke, or in Romans 4 times, because it only occurs 4 times in the book of Romans. So in other words, if you're looking for a particular word, you're going to have to know how many times it occurs. So not much good for looking a word up per se. And if you do want to learn words by vocabulary or by occurrence, then you can copy them out of here into some flashcards, and away you go. It does do that job for you, but it's on a book-by-book basis. You may not know if you've already learnt that word before or not, which means then that you may end up memorizing words, or at least writing them out, multiple times, which makes this great for a single book, but perhaps not so good if you're looking at the full range of the New Testament. And that's where, just forgive me, but this is why I came up with our Greek vocab pack, which is designed to lead you book by book through the entire Greek New Testament, working from the easiest books to read to the hardest books to read, and it lists every word once. So the first time you find it in the order of books is the first time you memorize it, and you never memorize it again. We assume you've learnt it and you know it. Now, this also works really well if you've already learnt a whole pile of vocabulary. So if you've learnt the vocabulary down to 20 occurrences and you want to learn all of the rest of them, then this is going to lead you book by book, and you're just going to have to skip all the words that occur 20 times or more. And all of the vocab is set up in digital vocab packs, so you can just download it, put it onto your phone, import it into your vocab app, or the vocab app that we recommend, which is Flashcards Deluxe, and away you go. So you can learn the words that occur between 15 and 20 times, 10 to 15 times, and so on, and just memorize all of those on a book-by-book basis. You can even leave out Hapexagomena if you want to, and all that kind of thing. So this is how I learned to read the New Testament in Greek. In fact, it's the product of me trying to do this for myself, struggling with things like this that didn't really give it to you that well. And if you don't know the words down to 20 occurrences, and you only know the ones that occur in beginning Greek, well, that's fine too, because it gives you another approach, which is you can learn all of the words chapter by chapter. So that means you can pick up a set of words for, say, 1 John chapter 1, memorize those words, and then read through 1 John chapter 1, and then go on to chapter 2, 3, 4, and so on. Some chapters will have more than 25 words in them to learn, and so you're going to have more than 25, more than one deck to learn for that, but it's all there, and it's all well laid out for you. And on top of that, we give you a third side on the vocab cards, which allows you to actually see side 1 is the Greek word, side 2 is the gloss, and on side 3 is a verse which includes that word, so you can actually see it in the wild. People have found this really helpful. So that's the Greek vocab pack, and I really recommend considering a look at that if you're serious about learning the words in the New Testament. Finally, just a couple of cautions as you think through this. First of all, if you're doing word studies, don't just pick the definition of any word in any book that just works for your thinking. Zodiates, for instance, he doesn't give you every instance of a word, so you can't just pick the one that works best for you. So you're going to have to do a little bit more work to figure out what's going on. In other words, do your own research. But then on the flip side of that, don't assume that your research is definitive. You still want to lean on these works and look at commentaries and do that hard work to make sure that you're actually getting this right. The scriptures are not there for us to turn to our meaning. We have to turn to its meaning. We have to ask, what did the original author actually mean to say? What was the meaning he wanted us to take away from that? And it may not be the one that we automatically think is the right one. So just be careful as you go through, particularly if you're doing word studies and you don't know the original language. In my opinion, the best way to deal with this is just to list all the times this word occurs in the New Testament and look through them. Go read the Greek verse that this word occurs in. Look at the context, see how it's being used. See how one context differs from another context, and how does that impact the way this word should be understood. That's the best way to look through and understand a word, in my opinion. But I hope this has been helpful. Again, I'll leave links to all of these resources down below. Go check them out there. And if there's anything you think I left out, or a resource you think is really good, leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you there. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. In the meantime, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery.